Hello and welcome to the fabulous interview channel. We're your hosts Marianne and Amanda, and we'll be interviewing a special guest today, Howard Shore, the creator of the Lord of the Rings trilogy music. Well, and other things, but you know, Lord of the Rings is pretty awesome. And before we bring him out and interview him, we'll have a little bit of a background by Amanda.
Howard Shore is a Canadian film composer. He wrote many compositions with his friends when he was a boy. He then went to Berklee School of Music in Boston to study composition. He's worked as the musical director of Saturday Night Live in 1975 and then started working with David Cronenberg for his film music. Some of the many movies that Mr. Shore has composed for are The Bro, Scanners, The Fly, Dead Ringers, Naked Lunch, and of course the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He's done a lot more, but that's just a short list of examples. Alright, now that that's done, let's bring him in.
Hello, Mr. Shore. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you for coming here today.
So, as you mentioned before, you studied at Berklee School of Music. How was the experience for you?
It was great. I started to take music more seriously there. I was the guy sitting at the back of the class going, "Oh, now I see." They explained everything that was already going on in my head.
Did you study any post-Bach examples of canon and fugue, like Bartok, Berg, Hindemith?
I love Hindemith. The things you're talking about, upper partials, imitation, and dissonant intervals. I love that stuff, and I love Bartok.
How was your experience working with David Cronenberg?
He's fantastic. We've tried so many different things. We've done 8 movies together. The first 3 were done in really low budget and in a very cut and paste method. The Brood was written for 21 strings and recorded in only 7 hours. It was, here's the cue, here's the rehearsal, here's the take, okay?
Another movie you worked on, Naked Lunch. It sounds more like a CD rather than a film score.
I think personally one of the best of my soundtracks is just a record to listen to. It's not just the cues assembled in chronological order. The decisions on order were based more on how the whole record flowed. But then I think it could just do a record. I don't need a movie.
You can get your own little slot at Tower Records, but would it be jazz or classical selection?
I don't know. I try to ignore all the distinctions in music. There are too many different slots. And the executives often don't have a clue about who fits where. When I was growing up, record stores had jazz and rock and classical. That was it. Now there's something like 15 delineations of each one of those groups. I don't understand it. It's all a corporate marketing. The distinction between film music and concert music, or whatever you want to call it these days, is such a stale separation, but it has been going on for over 50 years. There's a lot of money to be made in film music. There's also now a lot of contemporary musicians, pop artists, and that kind of thing, wanting to do film scores, probably for the same reason. It'll pay for them to go do their own stuff, though.
But isn't good film scoring based on composers' dramatic instincts and theatrical flair, beyond the respectable compositional craft? Some great composers could never work well on film, and some great film composers could never succeed as concert composers.
Exactly. It's not a language that you can learn. It has to become like a second nature, an instinct. That's why crossover guys are so interesting. Some classical composers would have been terrific for film. Strauss, Wagner, some of the great opera composers, Puccini and Verdi. They understand the dramatic lines.
You're less apprehensive about trying unusual sounds and effects now.
Yeah. With a lot of my early movie scores, I had the idea, but I didn't do them out of fear. And now I wish I had. I was always trying to stay safe, not mixing a D sharp with an E. Better to stick with just 2 E's and the like. As you get older, you tend to throw caution out the window and try more stuff. You're more willing to go with your intuition, plus you've matured compositionally. So now you have to handle those things with more success.
Your concert references to opera make great sense. You've got multiple characters, interactions, secrets, dreams, leitmotifs, and musical materials that are counterpoint to the characters.
Yeah. Or you could hear that cue and say, what the hell does that have to do with that scene? And taken on its own, it might not have anything to do with that scene, But seen in the context of the film, it could have been completely chilling. There's a scene at the end of Silence when the killer comes up from the basement and Jody's in his cluttered kitchen, and then there's a little moth that flies down out of the ray of light and lands on a spool of thread. It's at that moment that she realizes that she's now in the lion's den. This is the guy. There are many ways to score a scene like that. The casual to the frantic realization, escalating to the intense emotional awareness, climax of the moth, and what it signifies. If you listen to the music for the scene out of context or without the movie, it probably wouldn't make much sense at all, but when you watch the scene, the music doesn't relate carefully to the action, but it creates tension and emotion. It's the third element in the room. It drives you into the basement.
When you close your eyes and hear music, do you usually go with your first instincts?
Many times, then later I open my eyes and analyze and figure it out, but the process comes much later. It's not a matter of just closing my eyes and quickly reopening them. It's keeping them closed for a long time and really working things out in my mind and then opening my eyes. I've come to really trust my instincts and intuition. In some of my earlier scores, and I think we talked about this in a different context earlier, I rejected my original instincts in favor of a more traditional method or safe approach, only to look back later and wish I had gone with my gut feeling.
You know, it must be difficult to change and adjust to different directors' expectations.
Not really. There are so many ways to use music in a film. The expectation of it is really based on our own assumptions, how we as people get to see movies. We think, but shouldn't that music go like that? And I say, yeah, it could go like that, but it doesn't have to go like that. We've seen that so many times before. Wouldn't it be cool if it went something like this time? Sometimes the director says, that's cool, and times they say, no, I don't want it like that. It just depends on what a director's expectations are, how good he is at making the movie, and how imaginative or experimental he is.
We know you worked with Peter Jackson on his Lord of the Rings trilogy. How was it working with him?
Well, we worked really close together. I've never had a relationship like that. That's why I really treasure it. He's actually such a good writer. He's such a good filmmaker that he would work with me like any other writer. That's how we work. So even though I was doing the composition and the orchestrating as well as the conducting, while I was doing that, Peter was with me sort of every step of the way. He knew what I was writing every day. We talked about it or listened to the piece or discussed them. He was at all of my recording sessions. He's like a fantastic producer. He shows you how to find the great take or how to instill that in the orchestration. He talks about things like dynamics and weight and expression. He was always interested in that because essentially the music was recorded live. It really is a 19th century world. You're in with a symphony orchestra. There was no electronic instruments at all.
What kind of music did you use as a inspiration for the Lord of the Rings trilogy?
Well, the music is supposed to represent Middle-earth, which is a culture 5,000 years ago. I'm showing you the origins, possibly 5,000 years ago, of what this music then became. So Celtic music is one of the oldest forms of music in that work. So what you're hearing in the score might have been some of the origins of it 5,000 years ago, and then it evolved to what you know today as Celtic music.
How did you achieve this style?
We made use of folk instruments, some of which were really, really old. We used the sarangi and the ney flute, which are ancient instruments. Tolkien described Rohan as a Nordic Viking culture, so we used old folk instruments like the hardanger or the fiddle, things like that. So you're seeing a creation of a culture 5,000 years ago, and the music was to have the feeling of antiquity.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, folks. Thank you, Mr. Shore, for joining us on our fabulous interview channel.
Thank you for having me.
Tune in next week when we have a fabulous interview guest, Justin Bieber.
It's not a language that you can learn. I don't know where I am.
This is all the time we have for today, folks. Stay tuned for next week when we interview Justin Bieber. Ah, you closed the door!
When you hear your eyes...
Sure.